Okay, so this is Joshua, and this is Conor Neal's guide to starting a speech. So if you have not watched this video, please stop the video and watch his speech first, and then come back and listen to this video. Okay, so Conor Neal asks this question, and Conor Neal is a pretty famous, kind of famous business teacher or instructor, meaning that he teaches people who are in business, and he teaches them how to speak and do public speaking, and that's really his main focus, is sort of how to give good presentations. So what are the first words you should say in a speech? Well, most people, the first thing they say is, "Hello, my name is Joshua, and I'm going to talk to you about my topic, whatever my topic is." And that's okay. It's not a bad way to start a speech, and it's what most people do. And the problem is, it's not really an interesting way to start your speech, especially because most people know that information already. Now, I think you should put that on a title screen. I think you should put your name and your topic and all of that on the first slide, but I don't think you need to say that right away. I think that there's a better way to do it. And so Conor Neal gives some examples of what the best way to start a speech is, and these are his 3 ways. So the first is a story. The next is a question, and the other way is a fact. So we'll start with a fact. This would be some piece of information that's very interesting, usually something that has numbers, right? 10 million pounds of garbage is thrown away every day, or something like that, right? A fact. A question is also very good, and a question is very easy. Now, we have to be a little careful with questions when we do speeches, because we don't want to actually ask a question. We want to ask a question, give a couple of seconds to think, and then usually give the answer right away. But when you're making a real presentation in front of real students, you don't want them just shouting out. And one of the reasons why is, one, they may not say anything, and then you're just going to feel really uncomfortable. So just be ready to move on, right? If you ask a question and they don't answer. Second reason why it's not very good is they may get comfortable speaking during your presentation. And they may start doing that at a time that you don't want them to later on. And I've had some times where students will ask a question when they're presenting, and their classmates will answer, and then they'll just keep yelling the whole time. They'll just keep shouting out answers, and you can tell that the person that's presenting isn't really prepared for that, and it's hard for them to continue. Usually because they've rehearsed and practiced so much so that they can deliver their speech perfectly, that they can't really handle someone breaking them that off. So questions, when we ask them, we want to ask a question, what's the most important thing to speaking English like a native speaker? What's the one thing that you can do to improve your ability to become a native speaker like English speaker? Okay, and then get ready to move on, right? Now, the last idea, and the one that Conor Neal thinks is the best, is a story. So you begin with a story. All right, so these are the 3 ways: a story, a fact, or a question. So here we go. What are the first words that you should say in a speech, and what are the first words that will come out of your mouth when you start a speech, moving forward with enough momentum to carry you where you want to go? Well, a recent study shows that 9 out of 10 top-level executives people who work for the companies that shape their industry and our world, start their speech just like this. Hello, my name is, and today I will talk to you about, but I have a better way that I will share with you today. I shared this method with a former student of mine, and it changed his life. This information started him on his path towards his goal to start a life in Canada. Hello, my name is Joshua, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to start a speech. So you see what I've done here, right? I forgot at the beginning that I was going to do sort of a slower pause, so I'm sorry. The first part was really fast, but this is what I've done, right? I've given you a question, which is going to be yellow. What are the first words that you should say in a speech, right? I've given you a fact. 9 out of 10 top level executives do a boring way of starting their speech. Hey, I'm Joshua, and I'm going to talk to you about starting a speech. Right? That's a boring way to start a speech. So that's how they usually do it. So that's my fact. And a personal story, which is my story. So what am I trying to show you with all of this? Well, what I'm trying to show you is that these things often work best when they're together. So you really do want to think, can I give a fact and then ask a question? Could I ask a question and then tell a story? Okay, so this week we're going to be looking at this TED Talk, How to Stay Calm When You Know You'll Be Stressed, and it's, has a really good example of what I'm talking about. So you'll be watching this, but if in case you want to, here's the link. A few years ago, I broke into my own house. Okay, so that's how he starts his speech. That's the first words that come out of his mouth. And what is it? Which way has he chosen? Well, of course, it's a story. So he's beginning with a story, right? A few years I broke into my own house. I'd just driven home. And so it's an interesting and it's a funny story that illustrates his point about, if you are stressed out, your brain doesn't work so well. And this is the way that he shows you that stress makes it hard to think. And so he gives you this, and then he tells you his whole speech. So then, how does he end his speech? Well, this is how he ends it. He says, getting back to that snowy night in Montreal, when I got back from my trip, I had my contractor install a combination lock next to the door with a key to the front door in it. An easy to remember combination, right? So what's he done? He's finished his story. Okay, he's finished his story. So his speech begins with a story, and the story seems maybe like it ends, but it doesn't actually end, because at the end of his speech, he finishes that story. Okay? Getting back to that snowy night in Montreal, that's the way he's showing you that he's starting and ending the speech with the same story. Right? He's reminding you that he talked about that already. Okay, so this is the concept, right? That the beginning and the end are meeting. That these are, if we can connect to these two things, the beginning and the end, it's going to have a very whole feeling, like a whole circle. It's going to feel like a complete journey that starts and ends in the right spot. So it's a very powerful way to begin and end your speeches with the same thing. Okay, it's very powerful. And I suggest you guys try it and start to do it. Right. So, just in conclusion, Conor Neal believes that there are 3 ways to start a speech. And a story, a question, and a fact. So, even before you say who you are, as long as they know that the presentation is beginning, if everyone is quietly looking at you, start the story with one of these ways. Don't even say who you are. You can say that after. You can, just like in my example, you can say that after, right? You can start with a question and then say who you are. But anyways, maybe you just say hi and you say your name. But then the first thing you should say after that, make sure, is a story, a question, or a fact. It's also very memorable if you end your speech in the same way that you started it. right? Like the snake that is swallowing its tail, right? It begins and ends in the same spot. So start the story in the introduction and then finish it in the conclusion. So that's if you're going to do a story. If you're doing a question, ask the question in the introduction, but don't give the answer. Wait until the conclusion, repeat the question, and then answer it. That's a really good idea. You could also ask the question, answer it, and then ask it again, answer it, but then add another part to the question and answer that part, right? So you could build the question as well, but the easiest way to do this is to ask a question and then answer it at the end. Give a fact, right? And then repeat it at the end. So go back to that same fact. Now you could also add another fact, right? So if you had the fact about how much garbage there was that I used as an example earlier, you could maybe talk about, okay, well, there was this much garbage, but now we recycle this much. So if I was doing an environmental speech, maybe that would be a good way to end it. We recycle 100,000 kilograms of plastic and paper every minute in the world, right? Okay, great. So you've showed me something that kind of works with my first fact, right? Make sure you also remind everyone that this is something you talked about in the introduction. Okay, so say, you remember I said this, or in the introduction I said that. You could even say that. You could say, in the introduction I told you, or at the beginning of my speech is a little bit more natural. So at the beginning of my speech I told you that you should do this, and so now here's the rest of it. Whatever that is, a story, a fact, or a question. So if you're able to do this, it's a very, very, very powerful way to make yourself more interesting. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to be interesting.